What's up, YouTube? So you guys seem to enjoy the previous kind of podcasty chat kind of stuff that I've posted previously. So I decided to do another one. This time I wanted to have a chat with a YouTube creator and Psytrance producer who's been cooking up a storm in the last few months. I think posting videos almost every day. So I wanted to get a little bit about his perspective, what keeps him going, and yeah, just chat some production stuff. So without further ado, I want to introduce Projektor. Let's get into it. Why don't you start off a bit about, like when you started the channel, how long you've been into Psytrance, maybe like how you got into Psytrance, and a bit about yourself.
So I've been starting producing about 7 years ago now. Just before I moved to Italy, a few people introduced me to electronic music. Before that, I was listening to mainly rock and metal and that kind of stuff. And I just, out of curiosity, kind of looked up how it was made. And that's kind of got me into FL Studio and just the basics of it. And I spent a long time just kind of, messing around, stuff like that. And then once I actually moved to Italy, I met one person in my classroom who had been producing for a little longer than me, 2 more years than me. And he taught me a lot of stuff. And then I decided to get one of those Novation control surfaces as a MIDI controller. But that came with Ableton, and it didn't work for FL Studio itself. So I used that, and I got into Ableton then, and that was just a lot faster. And then, kind of Psytrance, the progressive side of Psytrance kind of became very popular, and it got me introduced into the genre. I think 3 years back now, when Vini Vici dropped the Great Spirit with Armin van Buuren. And that kind of got me into Psytrance, and I started diving deeper into the genre, and now I'm just exclusively making that. And I kind of switched over from what I was doing before, which was a little bit of that big room, the club music. I did some dubstep, I did some trap, I did a little bit of everything. And now I'm more in my Psytrance phase.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of producers, I think seeing your progression has been pretty quick, and a lot of producers get into Psytrance a lot before they get into production of music. And I think you said that you were into other music, producing other music and stuff before you got into Psytrance. So it's actually pretty interesting to see, specifically the fact that you've only been doing it for 3 years. I think that's very interesting. So you also started on Fruity Loops?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did Fruity Loops for 4 years, and now the last 4 years has been Ableton.
Cool. Yeah, I also started on Fruity Loops, but I think I changed to Cubase when it was Cubase 2. Is when I switched. I can't remember what version of FL Studio it was. I think FL Studio 7, I think I was using at the time. Mm-hmm. Very long ago.
Yeah, my main problem with FL was that the more it got complicated, the more versions came out. It was you had the playlist, you had the sequencer, you had the piano roll, and all of them were in different windows, and then you had the mixer, and all of that is just on the same window in Ableton. So it's a lot faster to move around. And I have a very kind of weird workflow. I'm not one person that's okay, I'm going to start off with a production. I'll make all the sounds, then I'll mix it, and then I'll master it. I'll kind of do everything at once.
Yeah.
So that's a lot easier to do in Ableton, because you have everything at your disposal at all time.
Absolutely. I think, FL Studio was amazing in its infancy, but they kind of tried to overcomplicate things to compensate for a lot of the stuff that other DAWs had, while still at the same time kind of getting away from the simplicity of the thing, with the patcher and all sorts of stuff. It's great stuff, but again, I think the beauty of FL Studio is it's the great first step into music production. Mm-hmm. For me, it didn't have all these complicated things, and you just concentrated on sequencing in the little step sequencer window. And I think those types of things are so invaluable to production. It's often the kind of thing that I'll forget to talk about in tutorials and stuff like that, just because it's become part of the way that I understand music, those little step sequencer blocks and all sorts of stuff like that. When people, a lot of the time I'll get asked questions about where to layer the hi-hats and the snares and all sorts of stuff, but it just seems to me like, coming from this FL Studio, it just seemed so like ingrained in the way that you produce music, because it had those little presets like club and all sorts of stuff that you could just, okay, that's a 4/4 beat done, you know. So it kind of got a lot of those things out of the way, which was very cool. But yeah, as you learn more things, then you start to see why certain DAWs suit your style more. So I guess, like I said, they tried to sort of add these things which were competing with a lot of the other DAWs, but at the same time moved away from its kind of simplicity, which I think was the beauty of the whole thing. So you say you're in Italy?
Yeah. I started in Budapest, where I was for a year doing studying. So there's this program in Europe called the Erasmus program, which is basically an exchange program with different universities. So I was there, and that's kind of where the channel started, because we got into lockdown and that kind of stuff. I was already experimenting with like streaming and doing that kind of thing, and then I decided it would be cool to kind of do a few tutorials, show people what I was doing. And I posted a few of them on Reddit, and people really, really liked them. So I just kind of continued. And now I'm just kind of doing it and trying to get as many videos out as I can, and trying to get as many information out as I can.
Yeah, I think it's good.
So that's kind of where it started.
So you've only been posting videos like properly since beginning of lockdown?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Really want to get into it.
That's crazy. I didn't even realize, you know. I started seeing your stuff around that time, but it's because I was spending more time watching other stuff. So that's when I started seeing your stuff. But I'd presumed you had been doing it a lot longer. I think the quality of your content is very good. But you said that because you were streaming quite a bit beforehand.
Yeah. To be honest, I also did do the video production before. I had a tutorial channel before. But that was not Psytrance related. That was like 4 years ago, when I still did like trap and that kind of thing. So that's kind of already, has been a start of me doing that thing. But now that was without like a camera. That was with little audio processing. So that was just me filming myself. But here I really want to get into, having also the quality of the video be nice, but also the stuff that I talk about be very interesting. So there was a lot more experimentation involved, and a lot more trying to discover what other people were doing, including what you do on YouTube, and trying to kind of get ideas from that, see if there's stuff that I can add to that. So when I did the video, the first video that you noticed and you commented on was the one with the forest sounds, where I put them in key.
Yes. No, I'd been watching you for a little while before that, but I'm usually pretty quiet. I think I had subbed to you quite a long time before that. But that was the first time where I think you'd kind of forced my attention, because it was like a segue from one of my videos. Or you had commented, or you had put a link to my channel. So somebody had actually sent it to me and said, "Oh, have you seen this guy's channel? He gave you a shout out." So that's when I thought, okay, well, I might as well just extend greetings.
Yeah, that's kind of the way to get into it. But that's also because I spent, back when there was a lockdown, I spent the whole day, producing, and I always had a video playing. So I always was trying to get ideas from new people, including you. And when I saw that video, I was like already experimenting with the thing I did in Ableton with the MIDI and randomizing the MIDI. So that was a good way to kind of introduce that concept in the tutorials, and I decided to do it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of the stuff, like even myself, when I first started getting into it, I was following a lot of other genre stuff, who were the big guys at the time? Okay, Tom Cosm is kind of a bit in the Psytrance scene, but also Seamless and stuff like that. And I was trying to apply a lot of the stuff that they were doing, but to specific Psytrance sounds. And a lot of the ideas and stuff are still very similar, like the randomization of pitch and that kind of stuff. I've seen it used for all sorts of applications. I think even one of my very, very old videos, it was doing a similar thing to create like drum fills or to create random hi-hats and that kind of stuff. But I'd also got that idea from another, I think it was from a Seamless video. So it's amazing to see how these ideas develop and then somebody will comment on it or add to that idea, and then it's kind of like a snowball effect that eventually kind of gives everyone the kind of content that they're looking for, you know. So, for example, somebody in another genre like drum and bass or something might see something in one of your or my tutorials, and they might be like, hey, that's a good idea. Let me apply that to that genre. Meanwhile, there's producers all over the world learning from each one and how they kind of take that idea to fit that specific style or that specific genre. So I think it's amazing to see so many more producers on a platform like YouTube, because in the past, you know, when I first started getting into it, there wasn't really that much. Even myself, I look at a lot of the stuff that you do and I think, hey, well, maybe I can apply this, you know, push the envelope a little bit further. So yeah, it's good.
Well, I also have had a lot of people like message me that they follow my stuff, they watch my you know, the tutorials and everything that I do, but they don't make Psytrance. They don't like the genre, but they still watch so they can apply it to their own stuff. I had a few people who indeed do drum and bass, but also a few trap producers who now have gotten into, you know, making kind of a psychedelic version of trap, which is very interesting to see. That's the kind of crossover between genres. And being able to help with that and being able to give them ideas in terms of which sounds to make and how to, you know, add a little bit of that Psytrance feeling into a different genre is very cool as well.
Yeah, I think that's important, you know, especially considering, I think, how explored the Psytrance sound is at the moment. There's not very many people doing very different stuff. Obviously, there is, but you know, I think as a genre, we've got to a point where something needs to really break out of the box, and seeing a lot of people come from other genres and experiment with the stuff is, I think, the best way for something new to spark. You know, maybe they will create like some hybrid thing that then, you know, the bigger names start to pick up on, and it becomes part of a new subgenre of Psytrance, or who knows. So I think it's an important part of the evolution of any genre is the introduction of other genres into it to create these kind of new subgenres and stuff.
Yeah, well, of course we had seen kind of what Vici Vini was doing with kind of introducing big room, and that was more elaborated upon by others. Like Aaron van Buren is a very common one. He has like 500 million views on one of his tracks, which is essentially just a Psytrance kick and bass with like big room elements on top of it. Even though there's not really like a perception of that it's not sold as like real Psytrance, it's still bringing people into the scene, and it's still allowing people to discover, you know, through Vini Vici and those kind of people who have a broader audience than the main Psytrance audience, you know, get into the community and maybe explore it from there. So it's also giving more people the ability to just discover the genre and discover what we do as well.
It's one thing, though, that I never quite understood. I guess most genres will have these kind of like factions of purists that, you know, hate it when anybody tries to kind of mix another genre with Psytrance. Maybe you can speak on that coming from other genres, but it's something that I think is very prevalent with Psytrance, or maybe it's just because I've been in the scene so long, I've seen it. But it almost feels like every time somebody does try to create, you know, I'm not saying Vini Vici is like, you know, mind-blowingly different or anything like that, but he obviously created a stir in the scene, you know, and a lot of these guys, you know, I think that gets taken for granted, trying to do something different, but at the same time, then they get, you know, criticized. I don't know. What do you think? Coming from like another genre?
What I wanted to say is that in the metal genre, that's like because metal is very subdivided in different subgenres. You know, in Psytrance we have deep or dark Psy, we have forest, and a few more. But in metal, there's a lot more subgenres because that has been explored a lot more. But like every time a new subgenre is made, for example, with now in the 21st century, we have nu metal, which is just kind of a newer sound, introducing synths as well. And that's, you know, the people who don't like that are going to push back on that. But I think that's the same thing. It's just helping people who otherwise wouldn't have listened to metal get into metal more and make it more accessible. So at the end, it's going to be a good thing. So because maybe a few people get into the genre because of those, what you wouldn't call pure psytrance or pure metal or whatever, but then start making purer, if you would say it like that, forms of that genre, even if that's considered a bad thing at first. I think to make it more sustainable, to make your genre, live longer as well, it's a good thing in the end.
I think so, yeah. It's like, you're just kind of creating a bigger scene in general. And it just means that more people are there to choose what they want, I think what a lot of these people that think this way, what they don't realize is that the bigger the scene gets, that the more it'll kind of get separated into its kind of like subgenres and stuff like that, And I think the metal scene actually is a fantastic example, bringing that up, because now, especially, you're seeing a complete divide between new metal and all of its kind of subgenres and kind of metal and all of its subgenres. I think new metal is split into a whole bunch of different things nowadays. And the kind of major turning point is whether there are any electronic components in it. But then you get all sorts of different kinds and stuff like that. But I think what that does is it kind of solidifies more of a following in the certain style, because now there's just more choice for people. So I don't know. That's just the way I see it.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's a good thing to have diversity in a genre. And it's a little bit of a weird argument to say that your genre shouldn't evolve. Just the people who don't want to, evolve the genre, they could just listen to the same music, right? If you don't want your genre to evolve, why not just listen to your same music? And just to make it more sustainable, it has to evolve. So I think that's a very important thing.
I see you've been starting to use Faceplant recently.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with it on stream. I want to have a little bit more experience before I actually show it on YouTube. But it's a very interesting approach to the creating the tones, because it has a lot more visual representation, especially of the FM side and the phase distortion side. It kind of actually shows you what your waveform is going to look like. And that's kind of what I miss in Serum, and just, the freedom of being able to have more than 2 oscillators and more than 10 FX or whatever the amount is. But I think I haven't really dove into it very much, but like the whole infrastructure or the whole, what would you say, like the framework with the way you can add FX into other FX inside the kilohertz like suite. And I don't know what it's called, but that's the multi-band effect that allows you to change stuff together and that kind of thing. I think that's very interesting, and I would like to see what I can do with that. But I haven't just had the time to experiment a whole lot with it.
Yeah, it's a very different approach. When we coming from something like Serum or some of the other things, I think they're designed to be a lot more based on the way that we know virtual analog synthesis. Whereas I've come to find Faceplant is a lot more of like a blank canvas. So if I'm looking to do like, I quickly just want to do like an ARP or a lead or something that I know, like recreate a sound of like a pluck or something like that, then often something like Serum is good because the filter's already there, everything's in the right place, and it's designed to be like a virtual analog synthesizer. So it's quick to achieve these things. But often it gets to the point where it's like, well, what if I want a third filter to just carve off a little bit of the top end? Or what if I want, it's just a little bit of something else? And often it gets to the point where in my sound design process, rather than my like music writing process, it gets to the point where I'm like, I get stuck and I'm like, oh, now I just want to add one more thing. And that's why I've just kind of forced myself to use it mainly these days, because it doesn't really have that limitation. You can just keep stacking the effect. You could keep stacking. I think there's a maximum of like 32 generators or something like that. But even that is insane. You'll never get to the point where it's like, oh, I just want to add a little sample for a bit of pluck, or, 2 samples or something like that. Whereas often I'll be doing something in Serum and it'll be like, damn, I just want to do something, but it doesn't have the ability to just add one more thing. And then I'll end up closing the plugin, opening Faceplant, recreating the thing and adding extra layers and stuff like that. So I've just kind of forced myself into it, and I've started to understand a lot more about it, like the dry wet reverb trick and that kind of thing. I don't know if you saw
Yeah,
that.
I still need
that video.
I still need to up my skills. I will definitely rewatch some of your videos, because back when you released the first faceplant videos, obviously I wasn't really that interested because I just didn't have the software. So now I have a good excuse to give you some more watch time and catch up on my general skills. I have been watching a few general plugins like the overviews, but those generally don't tend to give the very nice details, the very cool experimental things that I'm often looking for in a synth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
they just-
actually something I found with my original videos with it that I did, is I was trying to compare it to Serum. I was trying to compare it to the other stuff that I know. And I was like, wait, let me just completely think out the box, use it in a granular type way, use it in, to create stuff that you would generally use samples for, atmospheres and that kind of stuff. And since thinking about it that way, it's kind of, every time I open it, I get kind of new ideas and stuff. So I even blame my old tutorials for being a little bit too much like those first look kind of vibes. But I guess those are also important for the people who just want to create those simple sounds and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Well,
often,
you have to get people interested, right? You have to get people to start liking the software that you're working with before they start, enjoying your tutorials. I don't think I would have been as popular as I have been now if I was using like a Linux DAW that is open source and nobody has access to, and weird synths that nobody has ever heard of. I think because you're using a software that people actually want to produce with and want to get introduced to, that they will also be more interested in what you're doing. And that's kind of the end goal.
That's
right?
true. And that's also why I think Serum is such a good one, because everyone has it. Every producer has it. So like when I do a video on Serum, it's like 10 times more likely to get more views than one with Faceplant. So I guess that's another thing that kind of shows you how popular the synth is. But at the same time, I'm kind of trying to draw people the other way because I know the capabilities and that kind of thing now. So.
Yeah, that was one of my worries when actually getting Faceplant, that I would start using it too much in like tutorials.
Yeah.
And obviously right now I haven't done that yet, but I do want to experiment with seeing what I can get out of Faceplant. That being said, though, I think it gets boring after a while. Like Serum, I have done so many things with that I find it harder to find cool things to talk about. Like maybe I'll be able to do a few more videos on like some interesting filter effects and that kind of thing. But then I think I'm like majority done with what I want to do in Serum and what I want to teach. There's not a lot more to explore to the synth. And I think a synthesizer like Faceplant will have a much longer lifespan in that way, as it just goes much deeper and there's a lot more cool effects you may be able to get from the synth itself.
And to think also like how young it actually is and how quickly it's developing. For example, in the last few like 0.1 updates, we've seen them add multiband processing into the plugin. The snap-in thing into the plugin. They've added the advanced unison thing. Whereas, I love Serum, don't get me wrong, and what Steve Duda is doing is amazing. But it feels like he also has just given it everything that it needs. And the features that we're seeing are a little bit too much. Like the moving of the LFOs thing, it's amazing, but I've used it once or twice, but it hasn't really become part of my workflow. Because those types of things are, you can kind of get away with doing other things that have just become part of my workflow. So I think it's going to take something big in an update, maybe a Serum 2 or something for me to do a lot more videos on it. So I see you use a lot of the Melda stuff. That's something that I've I completely slept on. I've always been like meaning to get into.
Yeah, Melda is very, very advanced, which is something I like. Again, I said it with Faceplant, but also other plugins. I really like to be able to dive deep into things and discover new things. And what I've often seen from what people like is, the FabFilter is a very popular company. But when I first got into music production, FabFilter Pro Q, the first version of it just didn't have as many features as the Melda stuff had when you compared it to the whole suite. So the power of Melda really comes from the fact that it's not just, okay, they have a multi-band distortion unit, but they also have a multi-band wave shaper. They also have a multi-band saturator. So even if your distortion isn't really the way you want it, you can, open up the multi-band amplifier or the multi-band saturator and try to get a slightly different sound out of it. And I think that's a lot more powerful than the way other plugins have it, where they would have one plugin that was capable of doing kind of everything, but just a little bit. And instead, they just have more plugins that would be more specific and therefore could also, dive into it very, very deep.
Okay, so it's more of like each of the plugins is very specific to a certain task rather than having, so they don't have like a host plugin that you can load all these different ones into Audition or to do stuff like that. Each one is, for example, like a multiband this or that, or mid to side this or that. Is that correct in my understanding?
Yeah. Okay. So they also always have the basic same architecture. So they'll have like a plugin that is just a normal, for example, a reverb, and they will have the same basic features. They'll have, knobs at the same position as every other plugin, and then they'll have a multi-band version of it where it's just the same interface, but it's a little bit extended to add the space for like band selection and the setting the crossovers and that kind of thing. And that's what makes it really easy to use, because if you understand the basic interface of one of the plugins, then it's really easy to get adapted to the next one in the series. And I do think they have like a host plugin kind of thing. I just haven't played a lot with it. There's something called MXXX, I think, which is able to open the other effects, and then you can set up like routing, kind of like how you would do that in Patcher from FL Studio.
Yes, I think that is quite cool. So, again, it kind of goes back to the idea of the simplicity of things. And one of the reasons why I think Faceplant is so awesome is if you just understand certain things, you will fly through each and every one of those little snap-ins, because the design architecture and stuff is identical, but each of the ones just has a specific kind of sound thing. And that's one thing that's kind of been drawing me as I was watching your videos where you do stuff on the Melda stuff. I could never quite tell the difference between which plugin is open at the time, but I think that's a good thing, because if you just understand how the company creates those plugins, you'll be able to open up a brand new one and know your way around it, which I think is a very important design thing, which a lot of the VST developers are forgetting about. They're trying to create things that look a lot like analog stuff, which obviously I think has its part when you're recreating the analog things, but
well, that has a different kind of advantage, and that's more geared towards people who are, in the mixing game since analog was invented and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, or people who want a specific
they were more made
vibe.
for people who were also able to use, the analog version of that. But now, as we are seeing more people just getting into music production from a digital starting point, I think we'll see a lot more companies trying to decide to to make something that is, more uniform and looks where all plugins look the same and act the same when you're actually using them.
Yeah, I think that's important. Actually, I wanted to ask a question, but I think you kind of answered it in itself earlier on. I was going to ask why you decided to stream on Twitch as opposed to YouTube. Was it just that you were doing it beforehand, before you started doing your YouTube videos and stuff, or is there a particular reason? Do you get more of traction there, or?
Well, first of all, I personally don't really like when I personally have a very optimized sub box on my YouTube, on my own YouTube account, and I really don't like when people who make high quality like videos also live stream on there, because then it kind of clogs up your subscription box. Like if they live stream every other day, you'll get like a thing in the subscription box, which is something I don't want to watch. So that's one of the reasons, but also because I already had started on Twitch and I had like a fairly small following there, and also it's just discoverability. Like if you're on multiple platforms, then obviously people can get into your tutorials via your Twitch streams, where otherwise they wouldn't have discovered you.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there's a lot of people who started watching my YouTube videos through my Twitch streams and who otherwise wouldn't have found me, because maybe they're not into YouTube, or they wouldn't have gotten into Psytrance if they wouldn't have found my stream. Because on YouTube, there's also a lot more people that you're competing with. Whereas on Twitch, most of the music-related streams are like radios or DJ live sets, that kind of thing, or just people playing live music. And music production there's barely like 3 or 4 streams at the time doing actual production, like digital. So it's easier to compete with as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I always just thought, no, I'm going to stay on YouTube because my viewers are there, but I never thought to bring other people. Maybe I should split it up, do like half-half. Sometimes like do streams on Twitch, sometimes do streams on YouTube. Still deciding.
Well, Twitch is fairly restrictive in that regard, in that you cannot, at least as a affiliate, which is what I am now, I cannot multi-stream anymore. So I cannot stream directly to YouTube and Twitch at the same time, have the same stream open at 2 different platforms. And then once you get into the partner program, which is where you have an average of 75 viewers, I think, which is still nowhere near where I am. So I still need to grow a lot more before getting there. But then you can only exclusively stream on Twitch, and they won't let you. That's like an exclusive deal. Obviously, you get a lot of perks for that, and you have your subscribe button that people can support you through, and Twitch Prime, which is something I already have, but you get like a bigger cut from your subscription, and you just get recommended more and that kind of thing. But the main thing is that it's for them, it's more exclusive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of, once you get in, for you it might make less sense to now get into Twitch, because then you would stop streaming on YouTube and you might lose viewership from that. Like, it's hard to transfer people from YouTube to Twitch once they start watching your streams on YouTube. Also, one positive thing I think about Twitch is that just the chatting system is a lot nicer, because you can have your own like emotes, and their whole emote system is very nice, which is just something I enjoy as well, because I just generally enjoy watching Twitch streams more because of the way chat works. Like, generally on YouTube, I think it's a little bit flat with what you can do in terms of, showing the basic emotes that you have on like WhatsApp and that kind of thing. But there isn't really any way to personalize your chatting experience with your viewers, where on Twitch that's a lot more possible.
So maybe I should do like sometimes stream on Twitch and sometimes on YouTube. Do like once a week and once a week kind of thing. Maybe do like a more planned thing on YouTube, and then just like messing around producing music on Twitch. I think that could be interesting.
Yeah. There is a fairly big community of Twitch streamers into music production. There's Musar Music, who does like pre-planned streams where he will have a few topics where he talks about, and he will ask his viewers to submit topics, and then he will study them and then do like a Twitch stream on that. So he has every Thursday he has theory, and he will go over different parts of either music theory or mixing or sound design or whatever. And then he has challenges on Monday. And so that's a lot more planned out and a lot more professional. But there's also a lot of people who just, sit down and produce. And what I've come to learn is that just sitting down and producing is almost as valuable, because then with those challenges and with that prepared stuff, you generally don't really experiment a lot. So what he'll do is he'll, explain the basics of sound design, and the next week he will get the same questions and he'll explain the basics of sound design again, but just to different viewers. So being somebody who just, produces and sits down can often teach you a lot more like of those neat tricks that you wouldn't have come up with yourself, which I think is really where creativity comes from. Studying the basic obviously helps, but once you get into, more in-depth, more weird tricks that somebody else might not think about, that's kind of where you can get a lot more creative with what you're actually showing to people. And I think that's very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's great also, like something that I've noticed is, when I'm producing on stream, I'm a lot more productive, because I don't want to bore the audience, of course. So if I'm like stuck with something, I'll think, think of something. and then I'll just think of something, and it'll be like something I haven't thought of before. And a lot of the time, working under pressure is an incredibly good way of pushing yourself to do these things. And it's something that I'd probably encourage a lot more people to do is, just even if whatever platform is to just stream and produce, because, you'll be on your tippy toes kind of, you won't want to produce a boring stream. So you will constantly be thinking of new things to do. And I think it's a very interesting take.
Well, for me, it's a little bit the opposite because I tend to talk a lot when, when streaming. When I watched you generally talk a little bit less and you're a lot more focused on what you're actually producing. And where I try to chat with the people a lot more and try to always explain at least what I'm doing. But what I've noticed there is that once you start explaining what you're doing, everything what you're doing kind of has to make sense, and there's a lot less room for experimentation. So what I'll generally do is I'll produce for an hour before stream, and then I'll turn on my stream so that I've already done the experimental part, and I've already come up with a basic idea for what I want to do, and then I'll just kind of maybe mix it or try to add the sound design part that are still needed, the more technical side where creativity is a little bit less needed afterwards. So that's kind of what I've noticed, but obviously that depends on the style you want to get when streaming.
Yeah, I mean, often I think, you're right. I think I may have worded it a bit incorrectly because I'll often also do a bit of production beforehand. But I mean, in my ability to kind of flesh out a track much quicker or finish the tasks I want to do much quicker, I kind of faff about a lot less when I'm on stream or when I'm under pressure. I think it's also very similar to when I've set time, a certain amount of time. I've started working on quite a lot more of a strict schedule where I'll be okay, at 4 p.m. I leave the studio and I'm done. And I don't even look at my computer the rest of the day. And what that forces you to do is to try get as much stuff done before that as possible. And you don't end up faffing about and stuff. And I get a very similar vibe when I'm streaming. You're kind of forced to be productive. But I know creativity is almost impossible to force. Actually, I'm doing a bit of a side video on something like that. Yeah, I often will have a little bit of stuff prepared, but then I'm able to kind of flesh it out into a full track much quicker if I'm under that kind of pressure than if I just kind of sit looping and I think, okay, how does it sound? And then I'll go make a sandwich and sit and eat it while it's looping, over and over again. Then I'll open a couple of browser windows and eventually I'm watching a live stream and the audio is off, but it's still looping,
Yeah, I think I have the same thing. I generally, when I'm producing off stream, I always have my second monitor. So I have 3 monitors here, and one has Discord open. The other one has a YouTube video open of just something completely unrelated that I'm watching, and then I'll have
same, yeah.
My DAW open, and there's a lot less attention on the DAW. So that's definitely a positive of streaming, that you have to be focused on what you're doing, so to constantly keep your production flowing and keep it interesting. But definitely one thing that I want to experiment with myself as well is just kind of time challenges almost. So I'll set a timer for, let's say, half an hour, and I want to say, okay, for that timer I want to make 2 lead sounds and try to sequence them in a cool way, or maybe try to make a new kick and bass and get a nicer kick and bass patch or something like that. Within a certain time limit, because now what I usually do is I open up a project, I get inspired, I make something, and then I say, okay, I need to add a kick and bass to this because I have an intro now and I want to start working on the drop, and then I'll get distracted looking for new ideas for kick and bass on YouTube or wherever, and then that really slows you down in your production, and it's a lot less productive once you need to find something new. You generally tend to, because of the way YouTube's recommendation system works as well, is when you open up YouTube, there's directly some content that you might be interested in to watch, which might not be production related, and you just kind of click on that out of habit.
Yep.
It's definitely a way to kind of slow down the production, the kind of the speed of how fast you're making stuff.
But also one thing for me is the decisions. Often, in my tutorial I did about structuring a track. I spoke a bit about those indecisive things like having hundreds of sounds but not being able to choose which one fits the track kind of thing. But often I find, like, when I set that, okay, 30 minutes time the track has to be done, or 1 hour's time a track has to be done, it's those those ums and ahs, they're out the window, and it's like, okay, this is either good or it's bad. The kind of threshold for how good a certain thing is very much dependent on how much time you have left to complete the project. So for myself, who's like a serial procrastinator, it's having that time challenge. It's part of how I can actually finish a project. I probably wouldn't be able to do it without that.
It's hard for me too. What I've been doing lately to kind of finish projects, especially with my last EP that I've released, is I'll have a new project open where I'll just render out all my songs as a WAV file, and then I'll listen to them once on my speakers and once on my headphones, and I'll just write down everything that I want to change about them. And once that's done, I'll go back into the project, and then I'll change those things, and then the track is finished. So I won't, be making decisions while I'm working in the project. I'm rather listening to it, or maybe I'll go for a walk. I'll have them on my phone and then walk around with my headphones and kind of listening to it, see if there's a few last things that I want to change. And if that's not, okay, then the track is done and I can start, releasing it, making sure that it goes to all the platforms well and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's also another very important thing, is like detaching yourself from the project while you're listening to it. And that kind of forces you to be a lot more critical, because now the only way you can interact with the project is you can't and ah about that EQ frequency. Just, write it down and get back to it when it's done, and it forces you to listen a lot better when you don't have the ability to pause it and edit a thing. So it's something I've been practicing a lot as well. When I finish the project, I'll open up like a few scopes, so I can't even, on the screen in front of it, so I can't even see the project even if I try. It like forces you to not be able to see anything and just listen to the whole thing till it's finished. Write down any problems or anything that you hear. Because often, then we'll jump back in and we'll start working on those problems. But if you hadn't have written down the list of things to do, no doubt by the time you've kind of EQ'd that snare that wasn't quite fitting, you've forgotten all the other problems that you heard about. So it's a very good thing to kind of jot those things down as well.
Yeah, not only that, but it also gives you a list that when you say, okay, it's finished, then it's really finished, and you're not, okay, I can spend maybe a little bit more time trying to maybe find a different snare sound or trying to get my hi-hats to be a little bit more glued. When that's not something that's on your list, then you're just going to forget it and you say, okay, my list is done. I'm done for today. I'm done with this project and I can move on to the next one. So that also gives you much more of a feeling that you're actually done, because you have, a visual representation of that you have done everything. You have crossed off everything on your list. And therefore it feels a lot more like it's a finished project. Open up a project and, continuously work. If I didn't have to sleep, eat, and go to the toilet, I could probably sit around for hours and hours doing very little detail work that nobody will notice in the end. And just because I want to do that and I hear something that could be a little bit cooler doesn't really mean that you have to actually do that and spend so much time on that.
It's a question I get a lot. How long will it take me to finish my first track? And I often will tell them, just break it down into steps. First, finish your first proper kick drum, then finish your first proper bass line, get them to work together, and then, write all these things down and set a time for each one, like an hour or 30 minutes. And a lot of the time we get stuck in this kind of, we're sitting at the bottom of the mountain and we're seeing the peak and we're like, it's such a huge mission. But without those steps, like, okay, 10 meters up, there's a rest. Another 10 meters up, there's a rest. Then these things just seem so impossible and so unachievable. But in actual fact, making a kick drum is not impossible. It's actually pretty easy. And making a bass line is not impossible. And all these little things are not impossible. They're pretty easy, and they can take you not that much time if you just practice. But I think a lot of people get stuck on that, that final goal of finishing the track, rather than just these little things, these day-to-day goals.
It's generally also that people like what I have a lot, because I have a lot of people just kind of sitting in my Discord, and they'll once in a while ask me a question of like, how do I create this bass line? How do I create this kick? and they'll show me an example that they're like 99.9% of the way there, right? They might need a little bit more saturation and that kind of thing. And I'm saying like, you're basically there. So try to put it in a track, try to see how it fits when you start adding elements to it, and try to mix and master it properly, and then get back to me with the result. So what I think a lot of people will do is they'll get, focused on maybe just their kick or bass, which is like in Psytrance is the main thing. People can spend a lot of time working on the kick and bass, but generally when I start a project, what I do is I'll have a kick sample in there that's just an audio sample, and I have a preset bass line that I'll put in there. And then once all the elements and all the other things are done, I go back and try to work out my kick line and bass line and make sure that those sit a little bit nicer. But if you start with your kick and bass and you spend 1 hour or 2 hours on there, you might end up with something that doesn't sound as nice because it's not sitting in the track. There's nothing to balance it against, and it's also you spend a lot more time trying to work out the details of something that you probably don't hear once all the other sounds are kind of in there.
That's very true. And I think, it's very much like these, when you listen to like a professional track, like an Asterix track that's been mastered by the best guys in our game, in our scene. And, when you compare, it's a thing I get all the time also, is how do I make this Asterix bass line? And I'm 100% sure it's the same as all of the other tutorials that myself and that you have made. It's just a saw wave with a filter. But it's just mastered so damn well, and the track it fits with everything else so damn well, and it's sidechained perfectly, and it's about everything else in context. And I think a lot of these guys are taking it out of context, and they're trying to achieve this massive goal of creating this perfect track rather than, just achieving it one step at a time, move on, one step at a time and move on, and putting that timer on it is kind of that way of saying, okay, now you have to move on. There's no decisions about it,
Generally, I like to say that the master of a track shouldn't be, gluing the track together, or shouldn't be doing as much work as most people make it do. It should just be like a limiter, kind of taking out the final peaks, and most of the things should be fixed in the mix. But it's amazing how much you can add those little details by just adding a little bit of saturation, a little bit of stereo processing, and maybe a little bit of dynamics to a track. It definitely can change the way something is perceived, and it makes those very simple sounds that you start out with sound a lot more deeper because they're all kind of glued together. And I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
So it's still good practice, obviously, to try to fix as many of the problems that you have with the sounds that you're working with in the mix, but to really get the final 5% of that sound that you're after is really a mastering thing, and gluing it together, because obviously you cannot glue elements together in the mix as well as you can do it in the master. Once they all start running through the same plugin, there's a lot more gluing there.
And I think also it's, again, it's like it goes back to everything in context, when you hear a track that's been mastered correctly, it has these kind of dynamics that you're not necessarily hearing, you're feeling in a good like on a good quality system. And comparing just like a raw kick and bass to that is almost impossible because of the way that it, the loudness of the entire thing. It's
both loudness and perceived, the way you perceive things, but also just the little bit of coloring that maybe if we take an example like Asterix, he probably has some studio gear, like some outboard gear that he runs his stuff through, that adds a little bit of that, the saturation you get once you put it through some actual analog gear, and that kind of thing. And I think that's also contributing a very little things to the sound that just make it seem like your very simple sound is something like incredible and something nobody else can do, where in reality it's just that last 5% that really makes it stand out a little bit.
It's true. And again, going back to that thing, when you kind of what I've found is when I've set myself a time constraint, then I'll often end up doing the tricks that I know, but trying to push the envelope a little bit further each time. And then I'll learn like slight little tricks as how to kind of fine tune my simple sound to sound a lot better. And I think that's an important thing that a lot of producers don't, they kind of, they follow our tutorials and they'll say like, oh, I've followed it to the exact T. I set the filter to 68% and I've, key tracked it and I put exactly the same amount of saturation, but it doesn't sound the same. And it's like, well, is the track in the same key? Have you made the same everything else with it and stuff like that? And yeah, it's a very important thing.
Yeah, both that. I also get a lot of people asking me for presets and stuff like that, or like in Ableton, you're able to just export a channel as a preset, so they'll ask me for that. But I generally don't give those away, because what I would like to do, what I would want people to do when they look at my tutorials is not to try to get the same sound as I do, but just to learn the little tricks that I'm doing in my sound design and try to apply those to like very different sounds, or maybe even try to recreate the sound up until a certain point and then use that to get new sounds and stuff like that. I think a tutorial is much more valuable if it gives you, inspiration and an idea of tackling a problem rather than showing you how to make one exact sound. And I'm trying to focus a lot more on trying to get my content to do that, which is a very hard thing. Because generally when I get like requests for certain sounds, I'll just, recreate the sound and guide them through the process. And sometimes it's hard to find that cool little trick to talk about. But lately that has been going better for me as well.
Yeah, I've been noticing you posting a video almost every day.
Yeah, I'm stepping back from that today now. Actually, I'm going to prepare for my exams that I have towards the end of September. So I'll probably start uploading a little bit less. But I really wanted to push it to get, the monetization, which either today or tomorrow I should be eligible for that. And that's just something I wanted to push because that was like another milestone for me. I think that would really benefit the channel as well, like technically speaking. From an analytics standpoint, YouTube will have more of an incentive to like push my videos out to new people because it will have like ads on it.
You either get recommended or not. Whether you have an ad or not won't change that. But obviously it depends how, obviously you need something from all the work that you do. So.
Yeah, that's true as well. Obviously, the extra money is nice, but I mainly want to just spread my message out and get that out there. And some people have said that it has a little bit of an influence on them. Obviously, there's a financial incentive for YouTube to have that, but I don't know in how far they're actually acting upon that. And obviously, it depends on a lot more factors than just having monetization.
Yeah.
The click-through rate is important.
Yeah. There's a lot more, I think, to the milestone, because then you can get, when you become a YouTube partner, then you can, you get super chat and you get all sorts of other perks as well as just being able to monetize your videos, I believe. So you can create like you can have like a membership program on your channel. You don't have a Patreon, do you?
Not yet. I am thinking about getting one. Right now, the only like financial monthly support that people can get me is through Twitch subscriptions, but that's just on the Twitch platform, and you're not really allowed to promote any other platform like Patreon on your Twitch.
Yeah.
So that's I don't want it to be too overly complicated, right? So if I have a Patreon, I'll have to make stuff for my Patreon supporters to make it a little bit more special for them. To support me. That's at least one thing that I can do, like maybe a little sample pack, those kind of things, or behind the scenes in like how I create videos, or maybe I'll show them one of the projects. They can download one of my songs as a project file, or one of those things. And I'll have to do that for both my subscriptions on Twitch, as well as my Patreon, as well as maybe your membership on YouTube. So having a lot of those programs is going to be fairly hard. And if I can limit it to just the Twitch subscription service and the YouTube membership, I think that would be better than having all three.
Yeah. So I mean, if I were in the position like where I was choosing what to do, I would probably go with the channel membership, I think when I was starting my Patreon, the channel membership wasn't a thing. But just because to keep it all in one place, and then rather, like, I chose not to monetize my videos, and a lot of people actually ask me why. But it's because, by that first, if you had to sit through like 30 seconds of ads and another 30 seconds, now sometimes you get double ads. By the time then they sit through that first 10 seconds, and if they don't like the video, they often dislike it. So the stuff that I've monetized, I get a lot of dislikes, so then I'll just unmonetize it. But I think because it kind of irritates people, like, I had to sit through ads for this bullshit. You know what I mean? If it's not the kind of content that they particularly want, which I guess we will get people that like they're not into Psytrance or whatever, or you offend them in some way. And having the ads on, they kind of feel like you've stolen time from them. That's just one thing I picked up. But then that's why I decided not to kind of monetize my videos, but only use community support. And I think at the same time, it like feels a lot nice having people in the Psytrance industry support me rather than kind of big companies, like the advertising agencies and things like that. And then you also get, for example, times when these big advertising companies will pull out of AdSense. It happens quite a few times with like Coca-Cola and stuff, where, big creators will do questionable things. So the big advertisers will pull out of the platform. And in those months, like the revenue on AdSense is like halved or even more. So it's a difficult thing to rely on the ads. So I would say maybe aim for a membership kind of thing where you have perks for the members. But obviously it's up to you. It's just the reason why I kind of didn't monetize my YouTube videos. And
I do definitely want to experiment with it, but we'll see how it goes and what's the better way of doing it. Obviously, having a membership version is a lot more stable. But for me, what would be an important thing, having an AdSense income, from the YouTube ads, obviously will reflect your work a lot more, because it's like every video makes a certain amount of revenue rather than every month. So I might be incentivized to make more content because of the way that the AdSense gives you money. I might start to feel lazy saying, okay, people are supporting me for this amount of money, so I can put in a little bit less work and still make the money I need to make, to live or to pay the rent or whatever.
Yeah, that's also true. That's also true. Something I've noticed is some guys will get a big number and then kind of just relax for a while. So yeah, it's dangerous. I get the temptations are out there. So just see what happens. But it's good that you're at the point now. I think, in the amount of time that you've been doing it now, it's pretty crazy to think. Well done.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride for me. Obviously, the community has helped a lot. Like most of my views are still like external, so coming from either Reddit or wherever it's being posted. I do post a lot of myself on Reddit, but I generally also have a lot of other people now posting my stuff like around the internet, which is kind of crazy to think about that people would do that people would take the time, out of their day to kind of support me for what I'm doing with my tutorials. But I think that's mainly due to the fact that I've been putting in so much work trying to get almost like one a day out. And I think people really appreciate the fact that they can just, start their morning or start their day with another video of mine, and that it's become like a solid routine for them. So I think that's really important in building a community, is to have something that they can come back to like every day almost.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that's very important.
Yeah, especially now during, it's for a lot of countries we're coming out of it, but, having so many people at home, just doing random creative things outside of music, we're getting a lot more. I'm seeing a lot of new faces and new numbers on my videos and stuff. So I think it's cool to, you give somebody something every day. I considered doing it, but I can't for the life of me. I don't know how you're able to film and edit and get a video out in a day. For me, it's like a 3-4 day thing.
Well, my edits nowadays are very simple because like the camera is always in the same place, the content is always in the same place, and the only thing I have to do is make sure that like the lower thirds where I advertise my Discord and my music and my Twitch are like down below, and the rest is all in my head. It's just that I have to type in the numbers and then it's done. So like an edit for me is like 10 minutes now. So it's a very short period of most of the filming or the making a video for me is in experimentation now, because the filming takes like how long I don't really have to cut things out and stuff like that. So I might film a 10-minute video in 12 minutes because I need to set it up a little bit, and maybe I mess up one time for the intro or something and I'll cut out a little bit, but generally I try to do everything in one take. So that's really speeding up my workflow in terms of filming. Obviously, once I feel like once I get a little bit bigger, I want to get a little bit more into what you're doing as well, a little bit more creative editing, that kind of thing, so that it's just a little bit more interesting to watch the content as well, rather than just, it being informative. It would also be a little bit more entertaining.
That's crazy though. So you don't like say things by mistake and edit it out and stuff. That's for me. Like I will shoot like an hour-long video and it turns into a 20-minute video.
Well, I'll generally just start over.
And are you an English speaker? Like, are you a mother tongue English speaker? Were you born to speak English, or do you speak other languages first?
I spoke Dutch first, but in the Netherlands, the English education is very good.
Yeah.
So I had a very big boost there, and I've generally been on the internet for like the most part of my life, and just in general, the internet has been in English for me. Like, whatever I do.
But man, right? For me, I'm an English speaker. I was born an English speaker, and I learned my whole life in English, and I still fuck up every second sentence. And I guess it's weird now. Like, I haven't said anything that I'm like, oh wait, I got to cut this out. I haven't really done anything that's silly. But when I sit down under pressure, I garble my sentences and all sorts of stuff. Like, the editing is my saving grace, really.
Well, what I generally try to do is I do have like a certain time of day that I'm filming, and before that I'll go out and I'll walk around. Like before, when I lived in Budapest, I would walk around the block a few times and just listen to some music, try to relax as much as possible. And I'll also make sure that I have some drinks with me, and that I'm not hungry and that kind of thing. So having the right mental state for recording is definitely important, because it does help you get a little bit nicer of a final product in that regards, and you don't have to maybe redo it. I've noticed a lot of times that if I went out the day before and I went like partying, that the day after all my recordings would last a lot longer, and they would I would still be having a hangover, and trying to record that was a lot harder because you're not in the right mental state. That was the last 2 weeks when Budapest started to open up again. Obviously, I wanted to still get some of that the partying of in the summer, because I didn't really have that, because I arrived late September or late August in Budapest, so I didn't really get to do the summer parties. And then with the lockdown, it started getting nice weather, and everybody in the student group kind of wanted to go out. And then the last 2 weeks we didn't have the lockdown. But I did notice that my productivity went down a lot more, not just because I was spending a lot less time at home, but also because the time I was spending at home was just a lot less productive. Just having the right mind state is definitely a lot more important than some people think.
Yeah,
not just when you're doing like what we're doing, like streaming and making content, but also just general production. I think, being healthy is nobody can sit behind their computer for like 8 hours and at that last hour still be as productive as they were the first hour. Like, that's not possible for people to do. So it's really important to like take breaks, make sure that you're not hungry, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny actually that you say that. In my stream the other day, like as it got sort of past the 3.5 hour mark, I could just feel like my mental state wasn't there anymore. So, yeah, I think like it's important, yeah, to the brain is like a muscle, you know, and very much like if you're an athlete, you wouldn't run a marathon without stretching your muscles first. So I'm a firm believer in the fact that you do need to, you know, prepare or just, you know, like take into account the sort of holistic things around not just music production, but life in general, and, you know, healthy body, healthy mind, as they say. I wanted to ask you, it's something that I ask a lot of the guys, what your favorite VST effects plugins are specifically, because I know everyone talks about synths, but nobody really talks about the effects. So maybe you can just tell me a couple, maybe stuff that I haven't heard of yet. That would be even a bonus.
Well, obviously the Melda stuff, again, because of the workflow. What I think is very overlooked in production is stereo processing. And I have like a stereo processing plugin on almost every track. At least like every lead sound has one, every effect sound has one. And I think that has really added a lot to, you know, the end result. Having, it's called M Stereo Processor, which is a plugin that allows you to multi-band, set the width, and also add some saturation to all of the bands. So it's a slight saturator, but mostly it's adding stereo width or making things mono, that kind of thing. And I think that's really important. And I see that so many times people will have their EQ settings right. They'll have their, you know, the general balance, the dynamics are all okay. And then everything is like mono. So then it doesn't really have depth in terms of the stereo field. And there's so much you can do by splitting things and making sure that maybe you're panning something to the left or the right, or doing some more interesting stereo modulation. And I think that's really where you can make your track shine a little bit more. Generally with Psytrance it's a little bit harder because it's obviously made for the club where most of the systems are still mono. But a lot of the music nowadays gets discovered in a format that is stereo. So DJs will be browsing SoundCloud, and if then all your things are sitting in the mono field, it will sound a lot less appealing to them, even though it might work better in like a club sense. In terms of making sure that your stuff also works on a stereo system is very important, and having like a dedicated tool for stereo processing is very important for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think also now though, you know, I've certainly noticed a lot less clubs doing the mono thing. The last time I think I played on a mono system, and it was like maybe over 6 years ago. So it's not something that I've noticed in a long time. Maybe it's just a local thing. I know here in South Africa we do have a lot of outdoor festivals as opposed to club nights. So I think it's kind of set a standard for the quality of sound and stuff. And like the one big club where a lot of Psytrance events happen here in Cape Town, they've actually got a Function 1 system in there, which the owner kind of prides on, like the the audio quality of his club and stuff. So I think we're very lucky in that, like most of the time you will hear Psytrance here locally, it's in stereo. So I haven't really had that issue and stuff. But that being said, it's always important because, again, you know, like you were saying, a lot of the time with music discovery, something that I've noticed now is a lot of people are listening just off the phone on the speaker. It's something I even check my stuff on because it sums to mono, and often there'll be, you know, leads will disappear and stuff on there. And if it's like, for example, the main hook or the main lead in your track, and it's got too much stereo processing and it's gone, it's going to be tough for somebody to discover it and be like, oh, this is an amazing track, for example. So it's always very important. It's not something that I often notice with festivals and clubs at the time being, thankfully. But yeah, again, for all the different aspects of how people are going to discover your music, how they're going to listen to it at home, and how they're going to listen to it at the party, I think all those things kind of come into play.
Well, a lot of different clubs here in Italy, at least, work with it's called like a fake stereo. So they'll have the DJ booth summed to mono, and then it goes to like a stereo processor who makes it stereo again, so that it works a lot better.
Yeah,
and
so
that's
there's no
like
phasing.
because obviously the problem what you have is if you pan something hard left and you have like a left speaker on your club and a right speaker, then people will hear on the right will hear like a different track than the people on the left. So they want to prevent that. So what they'll do is they will sum it to mono first and then make it stereo again. And that will make sure that everybody kind of hears the same track, but it will still have like a stereo effect for most people. It obviously depends on where you're standing in the club, like acoustics plays a huge role in that, and like the distance from each speaker. But I've heard about some of those techniques being used a lot here. And therefore, in general, you still want to make sure that, obviously it's just good practice to have your song work in mono as well as in stereo. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's overlooked a lot. But indeed, now with the streaming services and how well they've been taking off, especially lately with, clubs shutting down and stuff like that, just having a stereo mix that works well is, I think, getting more important than having a mono mix that works well. And therefore, the usefulness of a stereo just as kind of a shaping plugin, not really making something mono to stereo or making something stereo completely mono, just slightly shaping it so that it sits nicer, can not only change the tone a little bit, but also just the overall feel of the sound.
Yeah, it can also very much kind of change the balance of the track. If you've got a very monocentric main lead line that's playing at the same time as, your percussions, your snares, and your kick and your bass, which are mainly monocentric stuff. I mean, percussions will be a little bit here and there. Then it's going to sound a little bit muddy, but if you just spread that synth out across the spectrum, it's going to allow all the other elements to kind of cut through a lot nicer. So it's kind of about the context thing,
Yeah, and then obviously I do a lot with analyzers. So I'll almost always have like an analyzer open on a second screen as well. So that's kind of the second thing that might be a little bit overlooked. One of the main analyzers I want to recommend is Signalizer. It's a free one, and I have some presets from another content creator who also uses that and who got me introduced with that. And he has one for like a waterfall display. He has one for a waveform display, one for like the stereo display showing how stereo something is and how panned something is. And then he has one just like a normal spectrum. And they're very in-depth and very reactive, which I really like. You can really, hone down one frequency and see exactly what it's doing at any time, or maybe you want to go really in-depth and check out the waveform, you can just zoom in and check it out. And that's really powerful. And obviously, like the Melda stuff also has great analyzers, and one of the more powerful ones, especially for Psytrance, is their, I think, auto analyzer it's called. But I've that pre-set up, so I don't really have to like open it up and anything. That's just on my template. And what it does is, because of the way I have my routing set up, where I'll have all my drums, including the kick, I'll have my bass to a different return track, and I'll have my leads to a different return track. So they all go to a different return track. And then on those return tracks, I have those effects, and every effect kind of shows up as its own unit in the plugin, and then you can compare them. So I'll be able to compare my kick to my bass and see how my lead sounds are sitting, if they maybe need a little bit more sidechain or whatever, or if the frequencies aren't clashing too much. So that's definitely more like the analytical part of it, and something I've been spending a lot more time with now that I'm back here, because now that I'm back in Italy, obviously the kind of the feeling of the sounds that my speakers are making are kind of, I need to get used to my speaker setup again. Like, I've been in that room in Budapest for a year, and I had been making music there, and now I need to get kind of used to the room again. So having analyzers that kind of work well and you know how to work with them also really, really helps. Kind of more the mixing part rather than, the creative part.
Absolutely. But also for adjusting, I recently changed up the acoustics in my room, and I wouldn't have been able to dive straight back into producing and mixing so quickly if I weren't so fluent with spectrum analyzers and other analyzers, because those help to kind of like reset my ears to tell me, no, this should actually be here, you know. And then I was like, okay, I'm just hearing a little bit of extra boost that I didn't have before, you know. So it's a very important thing, especially if you're moving studios and that kind of thing. Yeah, I also
that's
swear by
together with
analyzers.
referencing, obviously.
And so any kind of like experimental effects kind of based stuff that you've been using?
Not really. Generally, I tend to use for like effects. I tend to use a lot of the Ableton stuff itself. I do have a few cool tricks with like having the delay and using that as a comb filter, or and those kind of things. So there is a lot more to some of the effects that people think. There's a few effects that are very like overlooked in Ableton, like erosion is one of those, which is kind of like a bit crusher in the same way that the kilohertz bit crusher works, where you can set the frequency at which the thing is made. And that's really powerful because the actual bit crusher that Ableton has, you can just set an amount and it's not really...
There's not much resolution.
So
Yeah, I know what you mean. It doesn't kind of sweep in. It's just click, 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 click. Yeah, that's
kind
like
of the same one as Serum has as well.
It's rather, I think, with the other one, it's not bit crushing. It's sample rate reduction. But it's a similar concept. Yeah, but erosion, it's much like what I think the kilohertz one does. But it's good that, you know, a lot of the time with those kind of effects, it's good that there's people out there doing tutorials on the more simple stuff, because a lot of the time, you know, what newcomers don't get taught is that almost all the effects are based on a series of very simple effects like filters and delays. And using those, you can make any other kind of effect, basically. And having a kind of limited tool set, but being able to create all these different things, I think is amazing. And that's one thing I kind of I'll give to Ableton, is their devices are amazing. And it's one thing that kind of sucks a little bit about Cubase, but there's so many other options out there that I felt like that wasn't really my deciding factor for a DAW.
Well, to be honest with you, that's kind of one of the things I feel are a little bit lacking, because I obviously came from FL Studio, and there was a lot more depth into the effects and a little bit more coloring as well. But also like the instruments in Ableton, I'm really not happy with what Ableton's instruments can do. Obviously, it's more geared towards like also DJing and live performance. So that wasn't really their main focus. And now they kind of have stepped up the game with the new wavetable synth. But I still feel like it's missing something like Harmor, where you can, you know, create custom filters, have like an additive synthesizer that can do everything and more. Or like Citrus, which is one of the most powerful FM synths out there. And so that's kind of what I'm lacking, is really in-depth like effects. And it's all, you know, doing the basics, and it's doing the basics very, very well. But there's not a lot of creativity in there. And that's kind of why I went into the Melda bundle as well, is because you can dive so deep into, like, for example, TurboVerb. You can write code that will generate reverbs for you. There's like a scripting language for your reverb, and you can edit early reflections. You can set each reflection and set how loud it is and where in time it occurs. So you can go very much in depth, whereas in Ableton you just have like a reverb length and a bit of coloring and a dry wet signal, and that's mostly it.
I think the ethos behind like the design of the Ableton stuff is like they designed it around their instrument racks. So like, for example, this is like what I discussed in the other reverb video I did. The Ableton Reverb, I'm not sure. I don't know if it has. I think it has got filters built in, but let's just say, for example, it doesn't. You would be able to create like a wet signal and a dry signal with the effects rack, and then just apply effects onto the wet signal, and that essentially is like having filters in your reverb. So using like the effects chains and stuff in Ableton, you're actually able to get a lot of stuff that you potentially wouldn't be able to do in plugins that don't have a kind of modular system like that. So I think on one hand, they kind of tried to keep it simple so that you could push the envelope in terms of the routing and designing unique effects racks and that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess it depends what sort of thing, what's how you work, how your workflow is, but also what your ultimate goal is. If I wanted to just put a simple but really good sounding low pass filter on something, I'm not going to try create a custom filter. I'm just going to use Soundtoys Filter Free because it sounds the best. Sometimes you don't need to overcomplicate stuff, but sometimes you do.
Well, that's kind of what plugins are for. I think the other main problem is just the fact that they're limited with their interface. Obviously, the Ableton effects are like you have them at the bottom, so they just have a limited interface. And now with the way they're doing Wavetable, which kind of pops up above that and sits in the playlist as well, is kind of fixing it. But that still needs to work in a limited amount of space. Whereas with like a plugin, you're able to like resize it, and you're generally also expected to be a little bit more complicated what you do. And I think that's one of the reasons why FL Studio is able to do that, because their effects open the same as plugins, so they're viewed much more as plugins. Whereas in Ableton, I think an effect is kind of viewed as a little bit less like a plugin. Even though it's doing the same thing, it's because it's like in its own little interface and it doesn't open up a new window. It's not looked as, something that should be very complex. So therefore, I think it was the kind of the only decision they could make in terms of how they would design it. I don't know how that works for Cubase, because I have never like really looked into how the effects work.
Cubase is really nice. They've kind of got the best of both worlds. You've either got like most of the plugins have like their own separate window, but then you've also got a thing called quick controls. And how quick controls works is kind of like your macros, where you can assign certain parameters in that, and then it shows on the left-hand side, you've got that inspector bar with the volume. If you don't want to go all the way to the mixer, you can just adjust your mixer stuff on the left-hand side of each channel. So on that side, you've got a thing there like that looks like an Ableton device with faders. And those 8 faders can either represent something that you've linked into the actual GUI that pops up, or you can set it to just automatically take the last 8 parameters that you've taken. So you can tweak around with the synth, close the synth's interface, and then you've got the last 8 parameters that you have there to just assign it. So they've you've got the bonus of having the GUI, which is cool for sound design and experimentation. But then if you just want to get to the writing process and write in your writes and automations and stuff like that, then you can close that and just focus on your quick controls. So it's very cool how, Cubase pretty much has everything. You just have to know the way around it. So
yeah, again, that's probably when it's a little bit more of a complex software. It's really hard to get into, so it's definitely one of those things that you might want to get into later.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you were to start out as a producer, I think both the Melda things, which is what I would say is like my most complex software, but also what you say in general with Cubase, and what I've seen from Cubase is that it's a lot more complex and it's a lot more professional than, for example, what Ableton is focusing on, where it's very fast workflow through, a very streamlined process. And there because of their design differences, they cannot get, the exact complexity that, for example, Cubase has, or what I said with the Melda stuff has.
But I think that's part of the beauty of it. It's like going back to, what we were saying about at the beginning, or about my thoughts on Fruity Loops, is, it does what it does really well. And Ableton the same. I think it's just not complicated enough, but it still offers you the ability to do these complicated things if you dive into the manual and you check out Max for Live.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to chat about, or you want to ask me, or?
Well, I guess the main thing what I do mostly on YouTube is like sound design and stuff like that. And I've been talking a lot about theming of tracks, which I think is the most important thing when it comes to making your tracks memorable. And every time like somebody sends me a track, it's usually what I would like to see from them is a little bit more of a theme. And so I would like to know what your thoughts on that are, and how you try to implement like memorability in a track, or making sure that it's recognizable and stuff like that. Because generally with Psytrance, what I see mostly is that all of the sounds kind of sound the same, which works well for DJ set. But then the people get home from the DJ set and they might want to check out your track, and there's not really anything they can, you know, search for in Google to get to your track. If they don't know your artist name or they don't know the title of it, it's really hard for your track to be found. And I've tried to experiment with some of the things you can do to do that, but I would like to know how you do that, how you tackle that as well.
I think it's particularly difficult because, you know, everyone kind of has their own expectations of what they want from the perfect piece of music. Often when I'm listening to music, I'm listening for stuff that's going to inspire me to do something different, or inspire me to create better music. Whereas I know that most listeners of music aren't listening to music that way. So, you know, for example, something that'll like draw my attention in a track is, I discussed this in the track structure tutorial, is generally something unique about the sound design or melody or the rhythm. But your average listener is not really listening to that kind of stuff. So it's, you know, it's often something that I get criticized for. That I think one example was one of the tracks from my album. They said, "Oh, it's great, it's technically amazing, but there is no theme." But when I sat down to write the thing, like conceptually, the whole track was based on a concept, and you know, to me, it was like the track was too theme heavy and not enough technicality. But then there was an average listener who felt it was the other way around. So I guess, you know, and then I saw your video where you were talking about a more sort of obvious theming, you know, using samples that would give you certain connotations of images, you know, from like movies and that kind of thing, or from games and that kind of thing. And I think, you know, that kind of gave me the light bulb moment, is maybe I wasn't being obvious enough, you know. Maybe I'm kind of trying to overcomplicate things because that's what I'm looking for in the music to inspire myself to be a better artist, if that makes sense. So I think it's also very important to, you know, listen to it from, or think about it from the listener's point of view, as well as maybe from a technical point of view, because nowadays a lot more people that are listening to the music are actually producing it themselves. So I think it's kind of shifting a little bit, you know, what governs some things, you know, what governs how much of an earworm something is. I think nowadays it's very much, it's a 50-50 thing, because, you know, one of the most requested things, the Vinny Vici and versus Asterix Adana bass line, there is something very different going on with that bass line. So, and maybe that's why a lot of producers are asking about it. Or is it just...
It's the one where the fundamentals shifted, right?
Yeah. Or is it that it's just a good track? I don't know. I guess it's one of those things we'll never really know what, you know, what our audience expects from us. But at the same time, I think it's a good thing, because, you know, sometimes you will do things that, for example, are unexpected to you, but that'll hook somebody, you know. You know, like my expectations from my album were completely opposite to what a lot of people were saying. You know, certain things which I thought were, you know, that was 100% concept and less like production. People thought they took it the other way around. But I think it's because I was trying to overproduce the concept rather than, you know, just let it speak for itself, I guess.
I guess I have the same thing. I tend to add a lot more vocals to my track than what I usually see. Like my tracks are very vocal heavy, and that's kind of what I like. Because then you can explore the theme also in a way that you can kind of explain it to people, and it might stick a little bit more. So I'll just have parts of the drop where it's just the kick and the bass and some very backgroundish effects elements, and then it's just like a vocal line tied to the theme in a way. And that's really a way to explore a little bit deeper into like theming for me. But that's something that might not work really well like on the dance floor, or maybe like when people are listening to it. So I kind of still want to see what people actually think about that kind of idea. If that's something that is also what other people want, or if it's just something that I find cool and just me alone. So it's indeed really hard to do that. What I've been experimenting a lot more with though is not so much vocals, but just having like general sounds that fit in the theme. So for the remix I'm doing of your track, which is Radiation, what I've done is I've like sampled some Geiger counter noise. I have sampled the Modern Warfare nuke alarm thing. There's that iconic nuke sound in Call of Duty, and I've sampled that and tried to implement that in some way into a track and kind of, you know, hint at these like almost like pop culture things that people really know belong to the theme of like radiation.
Yeah.
And trying to that way hint more to the radiation theme.
Well, that's kind of exactly what I was talking about. The example that I was talking about earlier, the entire track was made up of, all the lead sounds and everything were made from just 2 vocal samples. And that was kind of the idea, is to just create an entire track, except obviously the bass kick and percussions and that kind of thing, but all the leads and that kind of stuff and all the effect sounds and everything were part of the like vocal of the track, if that makes sense. So my idea was like the tone would be kind of similar throughout, but I think I just processed it so heavy that none of it sounded like, you know what I mean? So in my kind of pursuit for a better sound, I kind of took it too far beyond what would still be considered as part of the theme, if that makes sense. Rather than just, maybe not having the lead as complex and just letting the sample speak for itself. Whereas
Yeah,
I actually watched that
really
video
hard
that
to
you did, and when you put in the Geiger counters and stuff, I was like, you know what? It's such an obvious thing that you overlook when, use a radiation sample, it's part of the theme. It's, it's an obvious thing that a lot of us don't think about. We're trying to, I think it's also part of the fact that, when you're creating these YouTube videos, you're trying to think of these new ideas to make a video that's going to inspire a bunch of people. So in that, you're kind of overcomplicating a lot of the things that you do so you can find these new things. And I think that can sometimes just get a bit out of control, for me at least.
Yeah. What I generally tend to do when I do like a lot of experimentation is not to do the experimentation in concept of a track. So I'll have like my own, sound design session or mixing session where I take a few of the tracks from an existing tracks and I try and do cool way of maybe mixing things and experimenting that way. And what I've seen is then when you actually get back into, writing your own music, it becomes a lot easier to kind of separate that complexity that you want for your tutorials to find a new trick or to find a new idea, and the simplicity you need to just, write a piece of music normally without spending too much time on the details. So that has helped me a lot, but that's it's still really hard to keep to maybe a few sets of sounds. What I've noticed lately is that whenever I'm writing a track now, it's just becoming more and more complicated. I'll have more sounds, more audio tracks, that kind of thing. Where I used to have songs that would have like 60 audio tracks, audio and MIDI tracks. Now I'm like at double that, so I'll be at like 120, and I'll still need to write a third drop or something. So that's something I've definitely been seeing for my own projects, is that it just gets more difficult to make something cool without going too complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of decided, like, for my next set of releases or something, I'm going to kind of focus more on the performance with the modular synth. So I'm going to kind of, I'm not sure if I'm even going to go down this route, but I'm probably going to do more, focus on writing, getting a good kick and bass, getting good percussions, getting it all to groove together, and then just focus on writing good melodies and good sequences. I'm not going to give a toss about what it sounds like, and then just run the MIDI into the modular synth and experiment with like stuff in that moment, if that makes sense, and try capture more of that kind of thing. Because, when you listen to like old Simon Posford and some of that stuff, there's some of the sort of beauty is in the like the differences and stuff and the imperfections. And I kind of think that a lot of, we've gotten to the point now where audio software is so good and we're able to do everything that it's created this indecisiveness amongst a lot of producers where, we end up trying to create a sound that's way too complex, but not focusing on just writing a killer track. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I see myself working a lot with like MIDIs that are just one note. And then once I do a sound design and it's not working. And then I'll, just try to put a few of the notes 1 octave up or 1 octave down or something. And then suddenly it starts to sound a lot more, lively and a lot more danceable. So it's not just about sound design, which before I used to think a lot about that. And now I've also experimented a lot more with like the melodic part of it and that kind of thing. I'm still, I don't really know music theory and I don't really understand that part yet. So that's still something I really want to dive deeper into. But I do think that it's one of the things that my track is missing the most right now is the complexity in the sense of musically complex rather than just complex sounds.
Well, I think the beauty of Psytrance is that you don't really need all that much theory. It's mainly based in melodies. So we can kind of forget everything about harmonies and chords and that kind of thing. Obviously, there are people that do that in Psytrance, but to fit it in is you are already boxing yourself into a very different, it's different to the normal subgenres of Psytrance that we know, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but still the melody part, I think also has been lacking a lot with me. And what I would do is just very simple stuff and maybe have an ARP that is just playing, a minor chord with a 7th on top. That is the most basic form of an ARP. And I would just add the ARP effect to that, where what I would like to do is be able to just write an ARP that is a little bit more complex and therefore a little bit more interesting. And it's starting to work for me, but it's still something I want to get better at. So maybe I'll take like some classes or something for music theory just to kind of get that a little bit more in there and see what I can do with that.
What started helping me create better ARP lines is to be able to visualize the different shapes that ARPs are doing. So, for example, if you open up the ARP device and you render out like a sequence that like a up down, and it goes, and then you stretch the MIDI so you can see like how long it is, and you actually look at the notes and you see, okay, it's this one, then this one, then this one. And once you break down all those shapes and you understand that movement and what the different chords, where it places those in the sequence, if that makes sense, then you'll be able to easily just write that out because it'll be coming from memory, Now, what happens with me is I've kind of, instead of opening an ARP plugin at the moment, I kind of more like think about it in my head. I want this da 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 kind of motion or da 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 kind of thing. And because I've already like I understand how most of those ARP things work, then taking that kind of thing in my head and putting it into MIDI has just made it so much easier because I can kind of sing it in my head and I know, okay, that this note must be in the first 16th, this one on the second 16th, octaves apart kind of thing. So I would, bounce out a few MIDIs of Ableton's ARP device, stretch them out and see where they're actually playing. And then just start recreating them instead of using the ARP device. And you'll see just the freedom to shift one note in like after the fourth sequence. Just that changes the whole, it's like, oh, it's not the ARP device anymore. You actually programmed this, Even that, just these little subtle hints will make the sequences sound a lot better, in my opinion. I like to kind of stick to a simple thing, so it does sound like something you could do on an ARP, but every so often change the grid or add in a note or something like that. So it's still within the boundaries of like acceptable for simple electronic music, but just a little bit of shift here and there.
Yeah, I've been working on a remake of Asterix's Deep Jungle Walk, in which there's also like a very simple ARP sound. And what he's doing is, taking just one note every cycle of the ARP and just slightly changing that, and therefore getting it a little bit more complex. That's one of those projects that I'll probably never finish, but still a very good learning experience to take, to see how he works, not only with like simple ARP sounds, but also with maybe he has like an effect sound in there, which is in the intro, there's like a flute. And instead of it just being one note and playing a very cool patch, it's a very simple flute sound playing 2 or 3 notes and kind of sliding between those. And that's a lot more interesting as well. And just every time he repeats that effect, it's just slightly different. Not because it's like a different sound design or something, but because he takes 1 or 2 of the notes and just changes them up a little bit. It's one of I'm working on that remake since like 2 months now, and I'm like 10% done. So it's not like the sounds are getting there. It's just that I need that final little bit of making the few more sounds and kind of gluing it together. What I've noticed in his tracks is that he always has like one very dominant lead sound, and then there's like a very many very simple sounds below that. But to recreate all of those and to get the exact same feeling, that's really time consuming. So what I've mainly been focusing on is like the main sounds in there, which I want to nail before, like there is the ARPs in there, and in the breakdown he has like the vocal, which is very iconic. In the intro there is the vocal section, and that's in the first part of the drop as well. So those are all pretty much done, except that I need to do some like vocal restoration work, having some of the vocals be a little bit less noisy, because I don't want to use anything from the original track. So what I'm doing is I'm looking up the actual vocal samples that he used and trying to remake those. So there's the first one is from like a movie he sampled, and then the second one are like speeches from what's his name again?
It's Terence McKenna, isn't it?
So what I did is he has the vocal lines from that, and they're like from different speeches. So one of them will have a lot of background noise, which I need to remove, and the other one will be like totally weird, so I have to rewarp it or something like that. So there's a lot of work going into making those main sounds into the details. And the main thing I noticed there is indeed what I said about the melody being always different, and so there's a lot of work trying to get the same melody as well. So he will have like a lead sound, I believe in the second drop it is, and what he's done, instead of having an automation that just repeats like every 4 bars and having a MIDI that repeats every 4 bars, he will like copy it over and then slightly change both the MIDI and the automation to make it slightly more different, and then do that every time. So that's really taking complexity to the next level while still having the same base idea for every one of the the parts of it. Let's say he has like a 4-bar part, and then he will just move it along every time and then slightly changing it. So you'll have a basic idea that kind of sounds the same, but then once you start to listening to it and really dive into it, you will definitely notice that there are a few differences in there. And I think that's a really cool thing that track is doing in particular.
Well, I think that's also something that's incredibly hard to nail, that I think is incredibly good about Asterix, is that he's nailed that like really simple Psytrance sound, but very elegantly. Like he does it better than anybody else. And when you really start to break it down, it's incredibly complex, but yet it could still pass off. You could mix it alongside some of the most simple stuff. And I think that's testament to a really good producer or a really good theme of a track, is it stands out. To the high-end producers who are breaking it down and trying to figure out all these little aspects. But also, I think it's like one of the Psytrance tracks with the most views on the internet at the moment. So obviously, the general public enjoys it as well. Or maybe those views are me and you trying to figure out them. All those views are just me and you. No, I doubt it. But it's a great example of that good middle ground between complexity, but at the same time, just simplicity and beauty, you know? Really good balance of those.
I think another good example is Outsiders. I don't know if you know their
I know
songs as well. They also have like, they will have a very complex lead line, but they'll have no background elements to it. So it's just a kick and bass, some percussions, and like one lead line. And where usually I would have at least a few background elements trying to fill it up a little bit more. With their stuff, what they're doing, they're trying to get all of that from the same sound, which I think is a really cool idea and something I've been struggling with as well. I just tend to go for the easy way and like layer in some squelches and some extra cool ideas below my main lead. And I think being able to just have one sound be so good that it can fill up your entire track and make it interesting throughout the entire drop is very cool.
That's one of the things that I kind of tried to stress in my structure video is, identify, we'll spend like years and years and years trying to make the most complex sound. And then sometimes just the combination of the right effects will stumble upon something that just sounds much better. And, being able to just remove everything else and be like, okay, this is now what the track is about. This is definitely the concept. And build everything else around that is an invaluable tool. So I try to kind of like get that across in the video is, you get a lot of guys that say, oh, how do you get 50 synth layers to sound good? It's like, well, you delete 49 synth layers. Or at least you just try to get them to play, like get them to groove together, or, it's a lot of the time it'll be like one MIDI pattern and they've duplicated it and changed the synth patch, and then duplicated it and changed the synth patch. And it's like, why are these layers why do they not sound like layers, But yeah, I must also, like, it's one thing that I need to do is be more active in the Discord communities and stuff. Like, I've got mine, but I kind of concentrate there. But I feel like it's, like, I spend so much time trying to think, like, what do people want? What do people want? But then I kind of slap myself in the face and just be like, just ask the people what they want, Sometimes I get so worked up, like in my thought process before making a video that I don't stop and think, just put a poll up on the channel, or, just ask around in a couple of groups and people will tell you what they want to see, And that's what led to the track structure video. Is I asked a bunch of people, like, what if there's one video that nobody's really touched on YouTube, what would it be? And they were like, oh, we need more stuff on track structure. We need more stuff on track structure. So I was like, okay, I'm going to dedicate the next 2 weeks to just doing this, And I wouldn't say it's my most popular video. It's not, but it was rewarding to do because I spent a lot of time doing it. And when I put it out, the same people that I was asking about responded. So I think that to me means
that's always nice to see.
Yeah, more than like 1 million views is the fact that a few of the right people saw it and it inspired them,
Generally, the people who are, putting in their time in the Discord or just on my channel in general, I also tend to just, if I see a comment of them asking about a lead sound, instead of making a little 5-minute video on explaining how the lead works and that kind of thing, I'll try to dive a little bit deeper into it. And instead of showing off a very simple trick, try to also just not only show them how the sound works, but also how a producer might come to that, or how you can take it on from there. So it's generally rewarding to see that people invest a lot of time, in what I do, and therefore I try to reward that as well with, just trying to make better content. For example, that one big video I did with the 100 tips, Most of those tips were just something I came up with, like browsing through my Discord server and seeing what people were struggling with, and then I would write some stuff down, and that would be like the main subjects of that thing, of that video.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, you know, sometimes, like I said, you know, we get caught up in these, what's going to be the next big video that we make? But if we just ask, or ask and you shall receive. Yeah, unless there's something that you want to add.
No, I'm pretty okay. I think we had a great talk.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was nice to see your perspective. You know, you often don't get much info from these small videos, and it helps to just kind of like hear the unguarded opinion of people sometimes.
Yeah. Obviously, once I'm like recording something, I have my own filter of what I want to talk about, and being able to speak to somebody else as well is kind of lifting that filter as well, because then you know, you have your own input, and I get new ideas while I'm, you know, talking as well. Whereas when you're making a video, it's more about, you know, having what you already have in mind and trying to put that out to an audience. And I think these kind of chatting videos might also help people a little bit more, trying to not just understand what we do, but also, you know, how we think, which is something you cannot really explain when you're explaining a concept as well.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people
it's a really cool idea too.
Yeah, they see us on YouTube and they think that like we're these wizards or these gods or these unachievable producers, but you know, we were where they were not very long ago. And I think it's important to just, you know, be human with people sometimes online. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And thank you for all the content that you're putting out. Please slow down so some of us can get a chance. No, I'm joking. No, really, keep it up. It's amazing. It's inspiring myself, and I can only imagine thousands of others.
Yeah, it's going great, and it's amazing to see how many people are being inspired and just reaching out to me, thanking me for that kind of thing, not just in a comment, but also like in private messages. So that's very amazing. You the same. Obviously, you have grown a little bit more, and you have done this for a little bit longer. But I can see that people are still like supporting you as well, which is nice to see. And I wish you the best as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so keep it up, and we will definitely stay in touch. Hopefully we can do another one of these sometime.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Cool. So yeah, stay well. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Like I said, he's been posting an absolute storm of content on YouTube. So you guys should definitely head over to his channel and check it out. There's some really, really good stuff. Even inspired me a lot to kind of take a different approach to a couple of things. So definitely check out Projektor's channel. I hope you liked our little discussion. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. And like I said, be sure to head on over to his channel and maybe post a comment saying that I sent you. Awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, hit that like button. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. See you guys next time. Cheers.